let it never be said that we cannot adjust our positions.
That's what human rights is all about, right? We adjust our position.
There you go. That's our theme. So, very pleased to have with us. You all know him well. Volker Türk, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who has been appearing and has presented. Has made his presentation to the Third Committee of the General Assembly. Mr. Turk, welcome.
Precisely. Good afternoon, I should say. It's good to see some familiar faces. As you know, I took up my functions as United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights about 2 years ago. And I have to say it's a mandate that has only grown in importance ever since. As you know, we are in a particularly dangerous period in history. In particular, when disrespect for international humanitarian law, for international human rights law, is reaching a deafening crescendo. Respect for human rights, for the rule of law, for accountability, these are matters of international peace and security, and I think it's also important, particularly here in New York, to bear this in mind. What is essential now more than ever is to ensure that human rights permeate every discussion at the United Nations. Human rights bring a focus on facts, on the law, and on compassion. It's a focus that is particularly crucial in the fog of war. And this has been painfully stark in the Middle East over the past year. Today's findings by the IPC, which is, as you know, the recognized authority on food security, are beyond terrifying. They show that the number of people at catastrophic levels of hunger is expected to double in the coming months, and the risk of famine persists across the whole of Gaza. The world cannot let this happen. This crisis is principally the consequences of decisions made by the Israeli authorities. It is in their power to change the situation urgently. I have previously warned that starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited under international humanitarian law. It constitutes a war crime. As the occupying power, Israel has the specific obligations under international humanitarian law to bring into Gaza the necessary foodstuffs, medical supplies, and other articles, and to facilitate humanitarian relief by all means at its disposal. Unfortunately, the reality on the ground is that there is only a trickle of aid getting into Gaza. There are reports that Israeli forces are preventing humanitarian aid from accessing the north, exacerbating the already desperate humanitarian and medical needs. Israel's evacuation orders appear designed to cut off North Gaza completely from the rest of the territory, as bombing and other attacks continue. There are serious concerns about a large-scale forcible transfer of civilians not meeting the requirements of international law for evacuation on imperative military grounds. Forcible transfer of a large part of the population of North Gaza would amount to a war crime. I call on Israel immediately to facilitate the massive influx of humanitarian aid that is needed across all parts of Gaza. Meanwhile, Palestinian armed groups continue to hold hostages, now for over a year, in flagrant violation of international law. They must be immediately and unconditionally released. Moving to Lebanon. Months of exchanges of missiles between Hezbollah and Israeli forces along the Israel-Lebanon border have escalated into spiraling violence of much greater scale and even greater danger, with Israeli troops now present in Lebanon. Attacks against UN peacekeepers are in breach of international law and may also constitute war crimes. In Lebanon, Israelis' daily strikes on residential buildings in urban areas are taking an appalling toll on civilians, with significant numbers of casualties, destruction, and displacement. Hezbollah also continues to fire rockets into Israel, where many thousands are displaced from their homes. The risk of a full-fledged regional conflict remains very high, one that could engulf the lives and the human rights of millions of people. This illogic, and I call it illogic, of escalation must end. A ceasefire, an end to the occupation, and a return to the negotiating table, only these can advance the rights of Palestinians, Israelis, people in Lebanon, across the region and beyond, to live in peace and security. Wars and extreme violence devastate people's lives and leave legacies of trauma, loss, and grievance for generations to come. In Ukraine, nearly 1,000 days since Russia's full-scale invasion, we continue to see terrible devastation characterized by recurring human rights violations and war crimes. July 2024 was the deadliest month for civilians in Ukraine since October 2022, as we documented through my office's work on the ground. And with the ongoing attacks on crucial energy infrastructure, I fear for Ukrainians this coming winter. In Sudan, the warring parties, affiliated groups, and regional actors continue to compete for influence and power, forcing a staggering 10 million people to flee their homes and leaving more than 25 million people facing acute hunger. The situation is desperate, and there is evidence of the commission of war crimes and other atrocity crimes, and I urge states to cease military and financial support for the warring parties and to continue mediation efforts towards an immediate cessation of hostilities. In Haiti, my office has documented that more than 3,950 people have been killed as a result of gang violence so far this year, with another 1,834 injured and 1,150 kidnapped. In Myanmar, air and artillery strikes on civilians, mass arrests, reports of extrajudicial killings in blatant breach of human rights and humanitarian law continue unabated amidst stifling impunity. Nobody has been made safer by this violence waged by men in power. Every week, it seems, red lines are crossed, lives are destroyed, the environment damaged, extremism is fueled, and cycles of destruction, impunity, injustice, and pain continue. War can only truly end when respect for human rights reestablishes reason, justice, and compassion. As I told the General Assembly Third Committee yesterday, investment in human rights is investment in peace, and it is more essential than ever. When my office rings warning bells, as we have over many years for all the situations that I referred to above, the international community needs to listen and act to avert catastrophe. I also count on you as journalists covering the discussion at the United Nations to continue to insist that promotion and protection of human rights of all people everywhere takes central stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll now turn the floor over to questions. First question goes to Valeria Rubaca of the president of the UN Correspondents Association.
Thank you so much, Farhan. Thank you, High Commissioner, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondent Association. It's Valeria Robecco from ANSA. So first question is, we have seen the first aid convoys allowed by Israel in northern Gaza, but what you said is that this is absolutely not enough. So it is anyway a little sign of hope of a better situation on the aid access. And of course, I have a question on the possible killing of the Hamas leader. If the UN has any confirmation, or if this is confirmed, could ease in any way the end of the war, in your opinion? Thank you so much.
The tradition in Geneva is that we take a few, but I'm happy to answer one by one. I'm happy to. So obviously, I hope that the alarm bells that we have sounded, the United Nations and in particular the humanitarian community have sounded over the last couple of weeks are heard. If there is indeed now a confirmation that more aid comes in, that's a positive sign. But it's if you look at what is needed, you need about 500 trucks to come in per day. We obviously need a massive scale-up of humanitarian assistance to come in. I think we obviously cannot comment on whether or not this is the Hamas leader, and it's too early to speculate what this means.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turk. Always nice to see you back in your old stomping grounds. A follow-up on Gaza and then a broader question. Have you yourself been in contact with any of the top Israeli authorities about doing anything? And more broadly, you've named quite a number of other conflict areas. Why do you think at this particular time the world is in such a crisis of conflicts and non-adherence to international humanitarian law and international human rights law? Thank you.
Okay.
Could you please? Thanks.
Look, we have been trying to be in touch with the top Israeli government officials, but unfortunately we have had my office has had a very complex relationship with Israel over the last couple of years. I've written a number of times to the Israeli government so that that my office is able to document what's happened on the 7th of October. Unfortunately, I never got a response. The problem is, and this is also why I mentioned all these conflicts in today's world, and there are many more that I could continue and that you cover many times. If you see the start of an erosion of the edifice that was so painstakingly built up since the end of the Second World War and the Holocaust and the atrocity crimes that were committed in the first part of the 20th century, then we have to be very worried, because the erosion leads to more erosion. And if you have the pushing to the edges of the acceptance of civilian casualties in war and conflict, and you sort of get used to the fact that war is the answer to everything, I fear for the world. And I fear for human rights in particular. So as a result, my message is human rights are all the more important. We need to come back to the fundamental values, to the care for each and everyone, to the history of the human rights movement, and we need to honor and treasure it and use it for everyone everywhere, and not only focus on one particular conflict situation. We really need to look at everything. That's the message of human rights.
Me.
Behind you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Turk, for taking our question. I'm Alejandro Rincon with NTN24 from Latin America. I wonder if you can share with us your thoughts on the current situation in Venezuela, particularly following the electoral process of past July the 20th, just growing reports and concern about the deterioration of the situation of human rights internally, and growing reports of the crackdown of opposition and the reduction of civic spaces there, even that has even led to the arbitrary detention of children as young as 15 or 16. So now that the current government there is not cooperating with the UN, not with your office, so how do you move forward from that?
As you know, unfortunately, we had the incident of my office being basically closed. My staff had to leave within 72 hours, which was unprecedented. I hope that we will be able to continue our work again inside Venezuela, but we have been in touch with human rights defenders and civil society actors, but also with the authorities, and we keep making the points to them that indeed our big concern is arbitrary detention. In fact, I just have the numbers here. To date, we have verified arbitrary detention of 191 individuals. And it's absolutely clear they must be released immediately. And we need to work on, again, creating a civic space that is acceptable and is in line with international human rights law, especially when it comes to freedom of association, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly.
Bisan?
Thank you. My name is Bisan Abuquaik with Al Jazeera Arabic. On the issue of freedom of expression, association, the war on Gaza has witnessed one of the highest numbers of journalists and media workers being targeted. In your opinion, what sort of process should take place to actually ensure accountability so press freedoms is not just a slogan or a mantra, and it is indeed respected? And on the same issue, Al Jazeera has been targeted widely in Israel and West Bank and Gaza, with our offices being closed. And most recently, 2 of our journalists have been under Israeli fire. One of them, Fadi al-Wahidi, is now paralyzed and just entered a coma today. Our network is calling for his immediate evacuation to get the medical treatment that he needs. If you have any comment on that.
Look, for me, one thing is very clear, that journalists, especially those who work in war zones, are actually human rights defenders. So I consider you as part of the ecosystem of human rights, because without free independent media, without the coverage of what is happening, especially in war zones, we would not be able to do our work. And full solidarity with all of you and your colleagues, your teams around the world, for what you're doing on a daily basis. And the safety and the security and the protection of journalists is absolutely paramount, and we need a wake-up call for the world to actually see and realize this and do whatever needs to happen. I also hope that there will be investigations into each and every of the deaths. In fact, it seems that Gaza has become the deadliest place for journalists. I mean, there are reports of about 168 journalists and media workers that have been killed for the last year or so. But we also see this in other parts of the world, and it's clear there needs to be more recognition that the protection and safety of journalists is a big human rights concern. And as I said, I consider you human rights defenders.
Thanks. Sherwin?
High Commissioner Sherwin Bryce, Peace South African Broadcasting. You've consistently called on member states in the UN Security Council to act resolutely to prevent a wider conflict in the Middle East. Earlier this month, you said it was vital that they use their voices and influence to bring the warring parties to the negotiating table. I wonder if you can explain why you still see a remedy emanating from the members of the UN Security Council that day in and day out show you that they are incapable of arresting the situation, they are incapable of stopping conflicts, let alone preventing them. So I wonder if you can just comment why we seek a solution from a council and the members therein that demonstrate their inability to stop this. In addition to that, could you also comment on the international judicial processes that are underway? We have provisional measures that have been handed down by the International Court of Justice. They have gone unimplemented. And you have an ICC process. The prosecutor has asked for arrest warrants. 3 of those probably no longer hold, right? But in May. And so 150 days later, the pre-trial chamber is dragging its feet in terms of coming out with a decision. And I wonder what the impact of that is on the human rights on the ground.
It is important to hold to account each and every body that has responsibility in the international system, and the Security Council is part of it. In fact, the Security Council has pronounced itself and asked for a ceasefire. Let's not forget this. The issue now is to make sure that it actually gets implemented. The same is when it comes to the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice. There were 3 provisional measures that have been issued. They are binding. They need to be implemented. And each and every member state, not just of the United Nations, but of everywhere, has an interest that international law is respected. My role is to constantly point this out so that it doesn't get forgotten, because we actually have an international legal system that is there to be used. And it's to be used robustly. And it's to be used by each and every member state that cares about the rule of law.
Ephraim?
Thank you so much. Ephraim Kusaifi from Arab News Daily. A quick follow-up to your initial remarks and then a broader question. You have called on all countries who are financing and supplying arms to Sudan to stop doing so. You haven't done so in the case of Israel. What is your view on this? Would you like to see an arms embargo by states on Israel? That's the follow-up question. The second question is, High Commissioner, human rights have always been associated with the West. But since the Gaza genocide began, part of the shock that the world has been experiencing is watching many Western governments provide a cover for the war, financing it, supplying arms, cracking down at home against their own citizens who dare to take to the streets and call for an end of the war. My question to you is, what does that betrayal by Western countries to human rights means for those principles? And where do you see human rights going forward from here in light of this betrayal? And if you can, just a quick message also to those Western countries in particular. Thank you.
One thing is very clear. In any conflict and any war situation, there are obligations under the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law to ensure when they deliver support to any of the warring parties that they need to have due diligence applied that makes sure that whatever they do in terms of exports is not getting, is not used for the commission of war crimes, crimes against humanity. That's an obligation. And that's an obligation that I've been pointing out before the Human Rights Council on numerous occasions in all the conflict situations in the relation to the Middle East, but also in relation to Myanmar and Sudan and many other situations as well, including, by the way, Haiti, where there is in fact an arms embargo by the Security Council, which needs to be respected. But unfortunately, there are still too many loose ends when it comes to that. Look, I really think it's important for everyone to ensure that human rights are not understood as a Western construct, but as a universal promise that was crafted after cataclysmic events, war, atrocity crimes, depression in terms of economic depression and so inequalities, and that what has been built up so painstakingly, which we did not have before the 10th of December 1948, is not lost on us, because it's the measure that we need to apply to each and every situation where human rights abuses occur, where human rights violations occur. And that's, in particular, my job to ensure that the United Nations is clear and is clear for everyone. We make no exceptions, and that we bring that voice very clearly to the fore, which is why I also said in my statement, the investment in human rights is at this critical juncture ever more important, because it's the one thing that we can cling on to and that people can claim in terms of accountability, in terms of fighting impunity and so forth. And we need to use it. We need to finally use it in a way that it hasn't been done before. And just one thing, because my first mission was Sudan as High Commissioner. I went to Sudan. I decided on purpose to go there 2 years ago. It was November 22, and I did it because I wanted to meet the people who managed to overthrow a military dictatorship, a cruel one, al-Bashir, and it was women and it was young people who did that. And for them, I can tell you, there was not even a question about theoretical things, whether this is Western or not. They fought for their freedoms. And let's not forget the decolonization, the anti-apartheid, the labor movement, feminism, the revolutions, the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, the US revolutions were all human rights movements. And they were nourished by all parts of the world, not just by the West.
Do we have time for any more questions? Or I know you have to be going very, very soon, but...
Can we take maybe two more?
All right, two more questions. We'll do two last questions. Sharife and Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Mr. High Commissioner. I'm Sherif Etcheton from Anadolu Agency. You've just mentioned that countries with their exports have the duty to make sure that their weapons are not used in war crimes, crimes against humanity. As you may have also followed, Germany has acknowledged that it has sought assurances from Israel that it would not use its weapons in a genocide, or to put it another way, Israel has promised that it will adhere to international humanitarian law when using German-supplied weapons. But on the other hand, German Foreign Minister Baerbock insisted that halting arms sales to Israel was out of the question. So do you think it's sufficient to acquire such assurances on paper, per se just a letter, or do they really mean anything? How can countries make sure in that sense? Thank you.
And then he'll answer the last two.
Hi, my name is Mohammed Dawood. I'm a Dag Hammarskjöld Fellow from Indian Administrative Kashmir. In February 2024, you said that India has been increasing in restrictions of civic spaces in against Muslims. So my question is regarding Kashmir. We all know that Kashmir is the oldest conflict dispute between India, Pakistan, and now with China. So my question is, what steps is your office taking to address the human rights violations in Kashmir, particularly after the aftermath of abrogation of Article 370? And what role does the UN seek for international organizations and civil organizations for the protection of civil rights in this conflict zone? Thank you.
So when it comes to these obligations under international humanitarian law, it's important to have compliance frameworks and human rights due diligence in place. And this leads from assurances to the actual analysis of what is happening on the ground. And for this to happen, it depends always what type of arms are used for what purpose. And I think that's part of the obligation. When it comes to what you mentioned, look, we are actually both in touch with Pakistan and with India, with the Indian authorities. We have consistently discussed the issue in Kashmir, and for us it's absolutely critical to have access to both the India as well as the Pakistani part to be able to undertake our work. Thank you very much.
And Sharif's question?
I did.
Okay, all right, great. Thanks. I know that, I'm sorry, I know that there's still some hands up, but Mr. Turk needs to be going. I'd like once again to thank the High Commissioner for Human Rights for his briefing. And I also want all of you, if you can, to stay in the room, because immediately after this, our colleagues from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs will brief on the launching of the World Social Report for 2024.